Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, it's the second round of our conversations about Devin Townsend, this time about Z² Dark Matters. And now we come to the second round of this discussion, that of the second disc. One that definitely gripped more fans coming from Ziltoid The Omniscient, probably the album they went to first. It was the sequel that so many of them have been asking for, the glorious return of Ziltoid and the madcap space insanity that had defined that record. And yet, if I'm being completely honest, the more that I thought about it, the more I wasn't sure a sequel to Ziltoid The Omniscient was a great idea. Sure, there was undoubtedly more space to be tapped in that gloriously epic and epically silly saga of Ziltoid, but that album also ended in a way that didn't exactly leave itself open for sequels in the same way. It's similar to the sense of annoyance that I had when I saw Disney's live-action Alice in Wonderland directed by Tim Burton, that A, actually turned out to be a sequel, B, couldn't be bothered to call itself Through the Looking Glass, and C, was a total piece of shit. Not spoiling anything, but when you transform what was designed as a pure flight of fantasy or bout of madness into something more grounded in a conventional, concrete reality, you run the risk of overextending or breaking the joke, and that worried me here. Hell, it looked like Devin Townsend was running into problems writing this album too. A follow-up to Ziltoid was announced way back in 2009, and yet it took him 5 years to get this project to fully coalesce. He utilized the character bit on a satirical radio show back in 2013, and bandied around the idea of a visual project like a TV series, but this year he finally managed to pull things together for Z², and to placate the label, he had to bundle it with the Devin Townsend project album that actually managed to be pretty damn awesome. And you know what? Even despite some of my serious misgivings going into this album, I gotta admit, I was still pretty damn excited for a new Ziltoid record and a new adventure. Did we get it? Was it that good? Did he manage to hold up his end of the quality? Well, in a way. It's definitely a new Ziltoid adventure that's got plenty of callbacks to Ziltoid The Omniscient 7 years ago. It's bigger, it's heavier, it's more gloriously exaggerated than ever before, and I'm not sure it works at all. Speaking as a fan who was really trying to like this, and as a fan of progressive metal and of musicals, look guys, I want Dark Matters to click with me in the same way that Ziltoid The Omniscient did, and it doesn't. Where the first Ziltoid story was a flight of fantasy, a daydream that nimbly balanced comedy with sheer epic power, Z² Dark Matters, it's a cartoon, and not exactly a great one. I'm not saying it's bad by any stretch of the mind, don't get me wrong here, but I gotta admit, I'm underwhelmed and a little bit disappointed that this was the direction that Devin Townsend chose to take the story. On that note, I'm gonna be throwing up a spoiler warning right here. I'm gonna avoid talking about the big twist, but the overall arc of this story is gonna need to be discussed. You have been warned. But for those of you who are just looking to go in cold, it's the Devin Townsend album. It's still good. It's still worth checking out, but I gotta admit, it's not as good as it could have been. So appropriately, let's start with lyrics and themes. Devin Townsend has described the overall theme as Ziltoid against the world, and he's not far off. Originally being this alien, unlike any other, being revered on Earth before his bumbling triggers an invasion from the war princess of Titan and her army of poozers in order to crush humanity and take their coffee. And of course, he is scapegoated until he makes an uneasy truce with the humans, and their leader, Captain Spectacular, to take her down through the utilization of the Planet Smasher, except for his own sinister motivations behind it. And if all this sounds cliched as all hell, it's because the plot kind of is. And to be fair, the album knows it. The album is firmly tongue-in-cheek, the fourth wall is broken frequently by the narrator, and with the exception of Captain Spectacular, played in hilarious fashion by Chris Jericho, everyone seems to be treating any sort of attempt at drama with pure outright derision. The closest we get to any sort of serious theme overlaps with the individualist flavor of Sky Blue, and Ziltoid The Omniscient itself, and the general contempt that it has for pack mentality and people not thinking for themselves and just going along with the flow. And to be fair, it's well articulated between, you know, all the fart noises and all the toilet humor. Yeah, remember how I said this album was cartoonish? Yeah, that's probably the biggest change in tones in Ziltoid The Omniscient, and I'd argue it's not for the better. It mostly comes down to that sense of contrast. Ziltoid's original quest was for coffee, and the original enlightenment that it was going for, well, yeah, it was definitely absurd, but it was an absurdity that was played mostly straight by the entire cast and everyone involved. Yeah, it was hilarious, but it also allowed a greater breadth and tone. You could have straight out serious moments like Solar Winds, and they land pretty impressively well. But Z² Dark Matters opts to go for broad comedy across the board, with the only elements of gravitas coming through in the heavier music, not the actual content. Where the concept was the original joke on Ziltoid The Omniscient, now the joke's the entire narrative, and it renders chunks of the album overpoweringly silly. It doesn't help matters that Z² Dark Matters only bothers to take breathers for melodramatic narration. That's perhaps more concerned with landing some jokes than actually building any real gravitas. Well, either that or just exposition dumps. For as great as Devin Townsend is at setting a scene through instrumentation, especially surrounding the Poozers and their war princess, the latter played for glorious effect by Dominique Lenore-Percy of Stolen Babies. Fantastic job from her. I really liked her voice. The choice to have the narrator tell us how these characters supposedly behave rather than let them show us through dialogue or interactions with each other, I got to admit, that got kind of distracting at points. You gotta show, not tell. Now, you're probably wondering and noticing at this point that I am not really talking about the music on this record. Well, here's the thing. For as gloriously decadent and symphonic as this album is, a titanic wall of sound filled to the brim with crunching guitars, cacophonous drums, horns, spacey keyboards, sound effects, and a full backing choir, it doesn't exactly modulate or show a lot of contrast between songs. Now, most of this is an issue with production. Just like on Sky Blue, many of the sounds just bleed across the mix a little bit too long, which smothers some of the more distinctive textures, or simply overloads the mix with more sounds than it knows what to do with. But here, it's even more distracting because it actively makes the backing choral vocals that much more difficult to make out. Now, to be fair here, even though there isn't a lot of contrast, we're still dealing with an album that's powerfully melodic, incredibly heavy, and has a ton of real explosive swell and power. And there are some exceptions to that rule I was describing before. I really dug the explosive howls of Death Ray, the heavy groove of March of the Poozers, that seemed to blend industrial flavored guitars with this pulpy circus vibe. I liked it. The gleaming guitar melody that drove Earth, and of course the heavy crowd chorus of Dimension Z. But beyond that, this album rarely stops to take a breath, and the album's titanic momentum makes the fairly thin story, all things considered, feel a little bit inconsequential. Until, of course, we hit tracks like Wandering Eye and Through the Wormhole that are overloaded with plot. And look, very little of it is supported by any of those backing lyrics, most of which drift into towards some of the hyperbolic platitudes of which I have no idea Devin Townsend was intending them to be taken. They come across as extremely dramatic and potent, but considering the comedic tone of the rest of the album, I'm not sure how seriously we're supposed to be buying into these lyrics. And you know what? All this circles back to this record's purpose. Because, of course, it's a comedy. It's a pulpy sci-fi alien cartoon that works in broad, wacky tones, with the biggest joke being the juxtaposition between cosmic, exaggerated horrors and what they really are. But here's the thing. That's the biggest actual joke, and it's one that gets hammered into the ground by the album's end. Ziltoid is initially considered by humanity to be a wonder beyond all others, until it's revealed he's a bumbling schemer with delusions of grandeur and wouldn't be out of place next to Starscream. The War Princess brings together some real gravitas behind her, until you realize she's just a vain, petty monarch who goes after Earth, effectively being out of boredom and spite. The Poozers are Borg-like monsters that also fart across the stars and sound like Beaker from the Muppets, and the Planet Smasher, held up as a power that even Ziltoid fears, is a fuzzy, adorable creature the size of around a football. And maybe it's telling that even despite all of this, humanity in this particular album is totally clueless and is way too quick to lionize and demonize these figures. And if the album gave any real weight to that satire, which is really good social commentary, Dark Matters might have had more impact with me. But as it is, we don't get a lot of real jokes or satire or expansion on the subject beyond cheap toilet humor. And I gotta be honest, to me, that comes across as a little bit lazy. So look, I know musicals are usually broad, and on a certain level, Z² Dark Matters does exactly what it's designed to do. Be a broad, wacky space opera that doesn't remotely take itself seriously. But this sort of album lives and dies on good jokes, a well-told story that can balance out that tone, and performers who are really game for it, who are gonna really throw in their all. And really, I think Devin Townsend only nailed the last perfectly. Yeah, he's appropriating some cliches and bringing some satire to the table, but the record is so flagrantly broad in narrative and execution that it just feels thin to me, especially in comparison with its predecessor. Now, all that being said, if I completely ignore Ziltoid The Omniscient or the companion disc Sky Blue, does Dark Matters hold up? Well, yeah, it does. As harsh as I've been harsh to this record, it's still a really fun record that's gonna get a light 7 out of 10 from me. But as a step in the Ziltoid saga, I gotta admit, I hope for more here. And as for the possibility of a third entry from the To Be Continued, well guys, it's Devin Townsend. Whatever we're getting, it's gonna be interesting, and you bet that I'm gonna be checking it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can't imagine why this review will be contentious at all, but yeah, please leave your comments. Did the comedy work for you? It didn't quite click for me, but I get why it would work for some people. So yeah, if there's any other albums you want me to take a look at, or anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.